So it's taken me about 20 weeks instead of 12, but I did finally finish The Artist's Way, so it's time for a little bit of a review. Did I like the book? Was it useful to me? Did I end up making more art thanks to it? And perhaps most importantly, what didn't resonate with me about this? So as a quick recap, The Artist's Way was written by Julia Cameron, and this was first published in the 90s. This book is a huge bestseller. People have been raving about it worldwide for years and years and years. The way I got into this book was with curiosity, a bit of skepticism, maybe a lot of skepticism, but like a lot of curiosity. I actually got into the reasons why I picked up the book and also my expectations of it in this video. If you want a bit more context and also a look into how this book begins, I think that will be really helpful. So for context, I'm not a... I don't know if I can say that. I was gonna say I'm not a born artist. I'm not a born visual artist. You know how lots of people are like, oh yeah, I started drawing when I was a kid and I just never stopped, that kind of thing. That's not my story. I started doodling at maybe 24 years old. I didn't go to art school, none of that, but I did take an interest in art in my 20s. At this point in time, I'm a beginner in stained glass, which I don't know about the future, but currently it is my passion. So I'm very much self-taught in every dimension of art making. And I say this to emphasize the fact that imposter syndrome is something that I'm extremely familiar with when it comes to art, but also outside of it. I'm a recovering perfectionist, and for a long, long time, I wouldn't really let myself try anything unless I was pretty sure I'd do a really good job of it. So that's a bit of context as to who I am coming into this book. So first, let's talk about the two main tools of the 12-week program. They are the morning pages and the artist dates. So morning pages, very simple. Every morning you handwrite 3 pages of mind dump, whatever comes into mind, and then you finish it off with affirmations. I actually really liked that. I didn't expect to enjoy writing morning pages that much. Journaling feels really boring. I'm already in my thoughts all the time. I'm already sitting in them all the time. So what use am I gonna get out of putting them down on the page? But actually, it was super helpful. It gave me an angle of focus. Because I was writing morning pages for The Artist's Way, I was kind of thinking about creativity more. I was thinking about the place that my artwork has in my life, or my art practice has in my life. Actually spending a little bit more time thinking about those things made it so that in my day-to-day, I was more likely to engage in creative practices because I was kind of already priming myself from the morning onwards to think about it and prioritize it to an extent. So I did really like morning pages. I haven't really stuck to them. I kind of stopped writing morning pages when I moved house, which I think is understandable because moving is exhausting and there's just better shit to do, man. But I haven't really gone back to them. I think morning pages are most useful when you have a practice of checking in daily. At this point, I feel a little bit disconnected from that practice because I haven't been doing it for a few weeks, maybe a month or so. So I've done it here and there. I feel like I'm back at the start where I'm kind of bored with my own thoughts. I already know what's in here. And without a prompt, I'm not that interested. Speaking of prompts, this is one really nice aspect of the book, is you do get a lot of assignments, but most of them are kind of journaling questions, journaling prompts, or thinking prompts, and I found those really helpful to kind of guide my writing in the morning. I think the journaling prompts are probably most useful to people who haven't done therapy before. I don't know if that's fair, but I feel like there's a lot of introspective work that is encouraged in the book, and that's great. But some of it is a little bit like, it's not tailored to one particular level or one particular person. So some of these things were a little bit too, I don't know, they just didn't speak to me as a person in this life stage. But when that was the case, I just skipped the questions and it was fine. The next tool in the Artist's Way program is artist dates. You set aside 1 to 2 hours per week to yourself, to doing something fun for yourself and by yourself. I absolutely hated artist dates. I didn't do them. I did maybe a couple over the whole 12/20 weeks that I did this program. I find it really stressful to add timely constraints into my calendar. And maybe this is counterintuitive because I am a freelancer. I set my own working times. I am very free. I'm very loosey-goosey in my schedule. Like I have very few meetings. I have very few must-dos at certain times. But the idea of having to stick to a strict schedule for time spent by myself was so stressful that I didn't end up doing any artist dates, basically. But then, here's the thing. Is this a personal failure, or am I already doing artist dates anyway? Because the whole point is spending time by yourself in a way that is enjoyable. Okay, I take a walk every day by myself around lunchtime, and I either go check on my local goats, or I go to the bookshop, or whatever else. I'll put on some music, whatever. I already do nice things for myself, so I feel like artist dates are cool if you don't. But I already quite like my life. I choose a lot of the parameters in it, and so I felt like this was a bit superfluous. The strictness of it felt really, really constricting, and I just couldn't connect with that. I do question why I'm not able to do artist dates when they should be fun, and there is a part in the book that has possibly an answer to that. This is from chapter 10, and there's a whole part about workaholism. Now, I've never identified with workaholism because I do have very strict boundaries, not working over the weekend, not working most evenings, things like that, things that a lot of freelancers tend to struggle with. I'm totally fine with. So I thought, workaholism, that's not me at all. But then there were a few questions that I actually answered workaholically to. For instance, I postpone outings until the deadline is over. That is often the case for me. I take vacations. Very seldom. I allow myself free time between projects. Seldom. I set out to do one job and start on 3 more at the same time. Yep. I fall in with others' plans and fill my free time with their agendas. That is me in a nutshell. I allow myself downtime to do nothing. And I use the word deadline to describe and rationalize my workload. Listen to this. In creative recovery, it is far easier to get people to do the extra work of the morning pages than it is to get them to do the assigned play of an artist date. Play can make a workaholic very nervous. Fun is scary. If I had more time, I'd have more fun, we like to tell ourselves. But this is seldom the truth. This one really called me out. This is honestly a great example of the great parts of this book is it manages to point at very specific things that you might do that are kind of you standing in your own way rather than actual issues, and especially, come on, I don't have to be at an office 40 hours a week, so I really have very few excuses, but it feels like I am very much constrained. So having these kinds of, wake up kind of moments made me feel less alone and less silly for doing the things I do, and apparently they are very common. In week 4, you're assigned a reading deprivation, meaning a whole week where you're not supposed to read anything. And that includes for leisure, but that also includes newspapers, things like that. Now, this was written in the 90s, and media is just so much more these days. There's so much more of everything. It is so much more present. Of course, I need to disconnect a little bit. So I did. I disconnected a little bit. I couldn't go fully without media because my job is media. So I did heavily limit my use of podcasts, of YouTube in the background. I didn't really read anything. So it was an experiment, and I did feel like all of a sudden I was kind of more creative because I was filling space a lot less. And I actually spoke about that in my last video, all about constant consumption and the distraction that creates and how difficult it is to have your own thoughts in this world of constant noise. So, it was helpful, but I don't think 1 week is really enough to see significant changes in my life. But also after a week, I tried to lessen my consumption afterwards, but progressively I went back to whatever my norm is, really. So interesting, but ultimately inconclusive. Has this book allowed me to make more art? No? Yes? Honestly, I don't know. I think the best thing it's done, actually, is encourage me to have more fun and try more things. I don't think I necessarily produced more, but I tried more things. So I made a zine, for instance. I did some doodling. The thing about this book is it feels like a license to try, a license to have fun. Like somebody's giving you permission to have this curiosity and just try things out without pressure. And with this permission to explore, you're kind of brought back into this childlike state of curiosity and excitement. And you can put your fears of being weird or doing things wrong or not perfectly on mute. You can put that all on mute, put it all aside. And that in itself is a very liberating thing to be told. So it's not so much that my output grew all that much, but I think it also gave me permission to consume more widely or get inspiration from more sources, which has felt really nice. A few months back, I was really struggling with what's the point of it all kind of thing. I was feeling a little bit, not nihilistic, but very confused as to what I can bring to the table. I made a video about it, actually, all about how I was searching for a message, I guess, a style, not an aesthetic style, but like some kind of identity, something, a theme to explore beyond the aesthetics of witchcraft, the aesthetics of magic. And I think reading The Artist's Way is a really helpful way to look for that, because it does give you this, not just the permission to look for things that are a little bit different, a little bit outside the usual zone where you work, but also a lot of prompts. And I think the prompts can be quite inspiring. One thing that kept coming up in my morning pages and in the journaling assignments is the fact that I really love music, and it turned out I wasn't really listening to music anymore. I also wasn't really singing by myself anymore, and I wasn't really playing music anymore. And I used to take guitar lessons when I was a teenager, and then I stopped. Guitar was very hard. But now I got my guitar back, and it's brought me so much joy just trying to fiddle on it. Fiddle on it? Fiddle with it. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have happened had it not been for The Artist's Way. Okay, one big thing we need to talk about is the God thing. I know a lot of you will have heard that this is a very spiritual book and that it talks about God a whole bunch. So here are my thoughts on it. As someone who is not religious, this honestly didn't bother me all that much. She does mention God a whole bunch, but it's not like, it's not massive. Like, you could just let it wash over you. You can just move on from it. It's not that big a deal. You can replace God with, I don't know, this sense of creativity. There's just lots of ways you can approach it. And some of these ideas aren't so much problematic from a non-believer point of view, but from a spiritual point of view. If your spiritual life is 0, then yeah, a lot of this book will mean very little to you. A lot of this book will still resonate though, so I still think it's worth picking up, but you might have to put aside maybe a third of it. That's not true. I'm being overly dramatic. Maybe a fourth of it. Maybe a quarter of this book will not be applicable to you if you're completely impervious to any mention of spiritual thinking. So in the book, she says, write about the God you do believe in and the God you would like to believe in. For some of us, this means, what if God's a woman and she's on my side? For others, it is a God of energy. For still others, a collective of higher forces moving us toward our highest good. What would a non-toxic God think of your creative goals, etc., etc.? My thinking was, what if I replace God with right? So instead of saying, what if God wants me to make art, I could rephrase it as, what if the right thing to do was to make art? Here's another God portion I highlighted. God as my source is a simple but completely effective plan for living. It removes negative dependency and anxiety from our lives by assuring us that God will provide. Our job is to listen for how. What this says is, the plan for your creativity for your art making is already in motion as we trust in God or otherwise, as we just trust and take our first leap of faith. If you take God out of that sentence, it still kind of works. You can say, I'm on my journey of art making, I'm on my creative path, and that still works. You don't need to be a believer to read this book and get something out of it. You might have to do some editing mentally, but it's totally feasible. Unfortunately, a lot of things didn't feel applicable to me in this book, especially on the earlier chapters. There was a lot of faff. I don't know, there was this whole section, I think it was a whole chapter, where she talks about people who try to undermine you and who are just so excited to see you fail. That's thankfully not my experience. I'm just a person doing my thing, so most of the things I struggle with are internal mindset related, implicit messaging from society, from family, from whatever, but not so much people actually trying to crush my dreams. I would say there's a really good middle section in this book. I think chapters 4 through 8 were really good, and then the last couple chapters were also a little bit redundant or a lot more vague. To be fair, this is also at the point where I put The Artist's Way on pause because I was moving and I also felt a little bit overwhelmed by all the end of chapter assignments that I hadn't completed yet, and I felt like I needed to do everything before I could move on to the next chapter, which is not true. But yeah, I kind of fell off the hype towards the end of the book. So in week 6, she talks about money and luxury and the place that creativity has within the realm of what's reasonable. This one was like, there were a few gut punches in reading this chapter. Most of us harbor a secret belief that work has to be work and not play, and that anything we really want to do, like write, act, dance, must be considered frivolous and be placed a distant second. This is not true. We secretly think that God wants us to be broke if we are going to be so decadent as to want to be artists. And then I wrote in the margin, if art is fun, it cannot count as work, and it is frivolous. This could be the most helpful section in the book, and I actually, rereading this now, I'm like, I need to reread this chapter properly and maybe do some more writing about it, maybe some more journaling, because these beliefs about money are really, really strongly rooted. And it's stuff like money is hard to get, you have to work long hours for it, you need to worry about it first and creativity second. All these things, they're like, you get why you think that way, right? It makes sense to have learned this, but it's kind of this weird mentality that says that creativity or fun work or playful work cannot exist or it cannot be made a priority because you will be poor and die. It's so telling how little we believe in work as a fun practice, in art as a valuable practice. There are so many things to unlearn. It's insane. All too often we become blocked and blame it on our lack of money. This is never an authentic block. The actual block is our feeling of constriction, our sense of powerlessness. Art requires us to empower ourselves with choice. At the most basic level, this means choosing to do self-care. This is so true. This is so true. And I found myself saying this so many times as I read the book. It just crystallizes things really well. I think Julia Cameron has just so much clarity about creativity and all the blocks that we have in our minds. It's really helpful seeing it written down to see, okay, first of all, I'm not alone in thinking this. Second of all, it is a bit silly when you think about it. So following up on money, this is a whole section on luxury and the fact that luxury isn't necessarily designer bags. Luxury is whatever you deem precious. So that can be time with friends. It can be pastimes that you really love doing. This one little section called me out like crazy. For this one person, luxury was raspberries, fresh raspberries. For her, it's like, okay, fresh raspberries, they just make my day. Like, I just enjoy my ice cream so much better, or my cereal so much better, or whatever. It just brings her so much joy in her day. And She says, they cost $1.95 to $4.50, depending on the season. I always tell myself they are too expensive, but the truth is that's a bargain for a week of luxury. It's less than a movie, less than a deluxe cheeseburger. I guess it's just more than I thought I was worth. So many times I tell myself not to buy something, even if it's objectively not a lot of money. I will tell myself it's a luxury. I don't need it. I shouldn't get it, even though it would bring me so much joy. This is the kind of mindset shift that this book encourages, is to let yourself have more pleasure, have more joy in your day-to-day, and those things will feed your soul in a way that then allows you to be more creative and to be more open. A lot of the things we're taught by society is that we need to be more serious and we need to be more careful and we need to be more this and more that and less happy and less curious and less weird. And a lot of this book is all about recovering our childlike curiosity, like I was saying before. It's very cool. It is very cool. In week 7, there's a whole section on perfectionism, and it took everything I had not to highlight the entire thing, but instead I will just read you a couple of things. Instead of creating freely and allowing errors to reveal themselves later as insights, we often get mired in getting the details right. We correct our originality into a uniformity that lacks passion and spontaneity. We correct our originality into a uniformity that lacks passion and spontaneity. This is something that resonates with me like crazy. That shows up in my work everywhere I look. It shows up in my stained glass patterns. It shows up absolutely everywhere. I'm trying to let go of that fucking need to make perfect work, but it's very difficult. Perfectionism is not a friend. Oh, listen to this too. The perfectionist writes, paints, creates with one eye on her audience. Instead of enjoying the process, the perfectionist is constantly grading the results. Absolutely. Constantly evaluating, never fully in the flow, always thinking about, what does this look like? Is this worthy of attention? Is this worthy of anything? And I actually find that I do this most when I'm drawing, and that is extremely unhelpful because every drawing goes through an ugly stage. Every piece of work, really, I think, goes through an ugly stage. But before I can get past the ugly stage, I think to myself, this is not good enough to exist in the world. It is not good enough to be perceived by anybody. I must stop. And this is something, I mean, I'm trying to get past it, but it's just been crystallized so well in this book. I mean, listen, for the perfectionist, there are no first drafts, rough sketches, warm-up exercises. Every draft is meant to be final, perfect, set in stone. Perfectionism is not a quest for the best, it is a pursuit of the worst in ourselves, the part that tells us that nothing we do will ever be good enough, that we should try again. This is the kind of place where this book really meets with therapy and self-help. There are so many impactful quotes like this one that reframe things, that help you see your mental defaults through a different light. That's so helpful because usually you're just living in your head without anyone trying to pick it apart, right? I could tell you many more things, many more insights I got from this book. These are just a few of the notes I actually took. It's full of notes. It's full of notes and highlighted passages. While I did not resonate with absolutely everything that's in this book, I did really enjoy reading it, and I have to say, I do recommend it. I do recommend it to anyone. Anyone who's creative, who's an artist or doesn't consider themselves an artist, but wants to do something with their lives or finds that there's something missing maybe in their lives, but they don't know what it is. If you don't know where to start with your creative journey, if you find yourself completely ashamed with whatever you're producing and you're like, will I ever be a good enough artist? Then yeah, you need to read this book. If I had one thing to say as a takeaway from this book, it would be that making art is a lifestyle, not necessarily a career. You don't have to be paid for your art. You don't have to make money from it. You don't have to do it full time for it to still count. And for your experience as a creative person, as an artist, to still matter and be worthy of prioritization and time and care. I think that's literally everything I can say about The Artist's Way at this point. I will need to reflect some more about it, and I'm sure revisiting this book in a few months' time, definitely in a few years' time, will be very helpful and insightful. That is my conclusion. Please let me know if you have any other questions about the book. If you've read it, what your impressions were of it. If you have any comments, I would really love to know what you thought about it. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it was definitely mine. So on that note, I will speak to you very soon, and yeah, see you later. Bye.